Okay, so hide. All right, so the other day we're looking at the sine and cosine graphs, which we'll look at the graph in a minute. The general form of each is going to be, if I list everything, where is that? There it is. D plus A and that's an A. Okay, so here are the two basic forms, and where this comes from is y. Our most basic, or the parent function, is just y equals sine of x, and y equals cosine of x. All right, and the big things that I tried to make sure we were clarified on the other day was the period and the amplitude. The amplitude being how high the sine stretches and cosine stretches, and the period is how long it takes it to do go through one rotation. So let me pull up. All right, so here, the yellow is a little tough to see. Here are our sine and our cosine functions side by side. All right, and let's see. There we go. We can write. What we're really focused on right now is from here to here. All right. And that is a period. Okay. We said a period. All right. Because these sine and cosines are these waves that just go up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down. All right. It repeats itself over and over and over again. So one period is one complete cycle from where it starts, in this case at 0, and when it gets back to that point. All right. You notice our standard sine and cosine goes from +1 down to -1. Our amplitude was the distance from the middle to the highest point. So on a standard cosine and sine, the amplitude is just 1, right? Because it goes up to +1 and down to -1. Now, as we graph a sine and cosine curve, there are 5 major points that we want to talk about, and those are the points that I had you write down the other day on the back of your unit circle. Okay, so whenever we're graphing a sine and a cosine, basically we want to find these 5 key points. And what are the 5 key points? So let's just look at this blue cosine. The 5 key points are where it starts, okay? And then on the standard one, it starts at 0 degrees or 0 pi, where it crosses the x-axis, where it bottoms out, where it comes back through the x-axis, and where it gets back to where it started. Okay, so that's the main thing we're going to be looking at when we're trying to graph these sine and cosines. All right, if you notice on the sine graph, the major points are right here where it starts, where it touches the top, where it comes back down through, where it goes to its low point, and then where it gets back to where it started. Okay? And if you notice, when you have those 5 separate points, it divides the graph into 1, 2, 3, 4 sections. Okay? It's either going to be going descending, bottoming out, ascending, whatever. So when we're graphing these sine and cosines, basically what we want to do is we want to find out these 5 points, and then we can fill in the graph from those 5 points. Okay? What we have to do is figure out what's going to change based on the parts of the equation are the period length, the amplitude, and then we're going to start looking at shifts. Shifting this to the right, shifting it up, shifting it down. Okay? And what we have, let's see if I can erase some of this stuff. Yeah. And once again, on our standard, we've got 0. We've got 2 pi, which is 360 degrees. 0 is 0 pi and 0 degrees. Halfway from that is pi, 180 degrees. Halfway in between that is pi over 2, which is 90 degrees. And halfway in between that is 3 pi over 2, which is 270 degrees. Okay? So we're going to use the standard. All right, and we're going to base everything we draw off of that. Okay, now, if we go back to the other day, let me just use this, if I can add a page. Let's see if I can drag this down. All right, so what we talked about the other day, based off of, and let's just look at the sine curve right now. D, what do we say? Plus a sine of all right, what we said the other day is this, whatever is multiplied out in front of the sine or the cosine, tells us the amplitude. All right, that number tells us how far it is from the center of the graph to its high point. Right, so in our normal y equals sine of x, there is an understood 1 right there, so we know our amplitude is 1. If I had y equals 2 sine of x, then what I know is the amplitude is 2. So when I'm drawing this, it's going to go up to 2, down to negative 2. Okay? That's pretty easy to see. All right, the other thing we talked about the other day was the period. How long does it take to go through this one cycle? All right. And we determined the standard parent function of sine, it takes 360 degrees or 2 pi. Okay. And the way we find the period is it's simply 2 pi over b. So whatever number is the coefficient of the x would be the denominator of our period. All right, now these two items are the biggest keys in order to graph any type of sine or cosine function. Okay? All right, so let me see if there we go, I've got a page now. Okay, so let's look at a very basic y equals sine of x over 2. All right, so what we want to be able to do when we get finished today is be able to graph at least one cycle of this. If you can do one cycle, it just repeats itself, so you know what it looks like. Okay, so on your assignment, you're going to have graphs to choose. You're going to be given an equation. You're going to have to pick the proper graph. Okay, so what you want to do is look for this one section that we're going to draw. Okay, now what we want is there are 5 points. The starting point, 2, 3, 4, 5 points that we need to know in order to draw this sine curve. Okay, all of them. Okay, they're all going to go through these 5 points. Now, what's going to change is the values of these tick marks. All right, and let's go through one using degrees. Okay, let's go through one using degrees, maybe make it a little bit simpler, and then we'll go to our radians. Okay, so we need to know, first thing you need to know is how long does it take to go through this cycle, the period. And our period is equal to 2 pi over b. Now, what is b in this one? Well, right, this is understood 1 in front of the x. So wouldn't we say that the b value is 1/2? And then I'm going to simplify this. And 2 pi divided by 1/2 is the same thing as 2 pi times 2 over 1. So our period, and I'm not going to use degrees, I'm going to go straight radians, is 4 pi. So to go through one cycle, it takes 4 pi. So once I find the period, all right, we're not working about any shifts right now. So this is going to be 0 is where it's going to start. It's going to end at 4 pi. So what I'm basically going to do now is I'm going to label my graph. I'm going to label my points on my x-coordinate, and I'm going to label my points on the y-coordinate. Now, the amplitude would be the number multiplied out front. It's the understood 1. So I know that my graph is going to go from 1 to -1. All right. I know it's going to start here. It's going to go up because this is a sine curve. It starts in the middle, or at 0. It's going to go up, down, and it's going to end up at the same spot at 4 pi. Now, I've got to figure out these. Now, there's different ways you can do it, but the way I'm going to do it is I need to find this middle point first. Well, the middle point is just going to be an average of the first and last point. How do we find the average? We add two. The average between 2 points is you add them and divide by 2. So if I take 0 plus 4 pi, that equals 4 pi. and then I divide it by 2 to find the average. That simplifies to 2 pi. So what that tells me is that point in the middle is 2 pi. All right. Now I need to find the value of this point, this tick mark. Well, I'm going to find the average. It's halfway in between these two, so I'm going to average these two to find that one in the middle. So 0 plus 2 pi and divide it by 2. That's 2 pi over 2 equals pi. So that point is pi. And then to find this one, it's halfway in between 2 pi and 4 pi. Okay, I'm going to average or add the 2 pi. Go over here, 2 pi plus 4 pi. I'm going to divide it by 2 to find the average. So that's 6 pi divided by 2, which is 3 pi. So now I have my graph labeled. All right. Now I just need to understand, am I going a sine curve or a cosine curve? The sine curve starts at 0. Cosine curve starts at the top of the amplitude. Sine starts at the middle of the amplitude. All right. And then each one of these points on a sine curve, the first one is when it tops out. The second one is where it crosses back through. The third one is where it bottoms out. And then the fourth spot is where it comes back together. So I know from here, I go up to the top. It's going to go back down. Oop, I don't draw very good on this. Here, here, to there. And now I've drawn my sine curve. Okay, with the Precalculus period, the period was 4 pi, or degrees, that would be what, 720 degrees that it took to repeat. Okay, so let's step back through this. When we're going to graph a sine or a cosine curve, all right, we want to put our 5 tick marks. Here was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. If we haven't shifted it any, then our first one is 0. Our last tick mark comes from finding the period. 2 pi over the coefficient of x. That's where we got 4 pi. So then I labeled 4 pi. Once I label my 4 pi, then I'm just finding the middle of each of these to get the other tick marks labeled. So I averaged 4 pi and 0 to find the middle one. Once I found the middle one, then I averaged the first one and the middle one to find the first or the second tick mark. And then I averaged the third and the fifth ones to find the fourth tick mark. Okay. Now, once I've got my 4 tick marks, all signs are going to basically be the same. It's going to start at the center, go up to the top. The next tick mark is when it's coming back down through. The next tick mark is when it's bottoming out. And the last tick mark is where it gets back to where it started. If it were a cosine curve, it would start at the top point, and then it would go down through 0. The next one, it would reach its bottom. The next one be back up through 0. And the last one when it gets back to where it started. Okay? So all our sine and cosine curves are going to be based on this same deal. Now, in a few minutes, we'll talk about them shifting, where they might shift over to the right or shift to the top. But the basic principle starts the same. You need to find where it starts. You need to find where it ends. Find those 3 points in the middle by cutting it in half and in half. All right, and then you got to look at the amplitude. Okay. So let's look at another one. Let me see if I can add another page. All right, so let's find another example. I don't want to do one that shifts yet. Or horizontal translation just yet. Let's see. All right, let's try this one. All right, so we've got f of x equals 2 cosine of 2x. All right, so we know our standard cosine starts at the top. If we just go from 0 to 2 pi in the standard, when it starts at the top of the amplitude, its first tick mark, it drops, crosses the x-axis. The middle, the second tick mark, it bottoms out. The third tick mark or the fourth tick mark, it backs up through 0, and the fifth tick mark is where it gets back to where it started. All right, so in this case, we need to know the amplitude, which is 2. That means it's going to go up to 2 and down to -2. And the period is 2 pi over the coefficient. So does everybody see that the period, so this is the first thing you're going to be asked to do through the first several questions of your assignment. List the amplitude and the period. Pretty simple. All right. So I've got my graph. I've got my first tick mark, my second, my third, my fourth, and my fifth. And my period is pi, so I can label my fifth tick mark. So this one is going to go through one cycle in only 180 degrees. So it's going to be more narrow, but it's really going to look the same. We're just labeling it different for us. But if it were graphed on the same graph as the last one, it would be squunched up. Okay. So remember how we find, next thing we need to do is we need to find this one right here. Well, we average these two. 0 plus pi equals pi. You divide it by 2. So that is pi over 2. All right. How do I find this point? Well, I'm going to average these two. 0 plus pi over 2 equals pi over 2. Now, when you're dealing with fractions, to me, it's easier to, instead of dividing by 2, would everybody agree that dividing by 2 is the same thing as multiplying by a half? I get what? Pi over 4. So this point is pi over 4. Then the last one, pi over 2 plus pi. Well, I've got to find a common denominator, which is going to make this, what, 2 over 2 pi, 2 pi over 2. So that is pi plus 2 pi is 3 pi over 2. I multiply by 1/2 to find the average, and I get 3 pi over 4. So there's my labels. My amplitude is 2, so I've got to go up 1, 2, -1, -2. My cosine starts at the top, so it's going to go there. The first tick mark is where it crosses back down through. The middle, the third tick mark, is where it bottoms out. The fourth tick mark is where it comes back up through the axis. And my fifth tick mark is where it ends up. So You want to just sort of draw that curve. All right. Then obviously on your answers, it's going to continue with the graph in both directions. But what you'll look for is where it start that first period, match it up in the proper tick marks on the bottom, and you'll know which graph you have correct. All right, any questions there? All right. Now, let's add a little something to that. And we are going to add a horizontal translation. All right, so what is a horizontal translation? That is a shift to the left or to the right. So basically what we're going to do is the start of our graph, instead of being 0, is going to be shifted to the left or it's going to be shifted to the right. Okay? But once we find out where it starts, our goal is still to find those 5 tick marks. So we want to find the first one. Then from there, we'll find the period and find the last one. And then we'll average to find the ones in the middle. And then the graph is going to work out the same way. All right. Now, what causes a horizontal translation or a horizontal shift? And it is if you go back to that original, it is the C value. All right, it is the C value. So if I have something like this, y equals 1/2 sine. So we know on this one, the amplitude is 1/2. It's topping out at 1/2. It's bottoming out at negative 1/2. Sine of x minus pi over 3. All right, so this, when I add or subtract something to the x variable, that shifts it left or right. And if you remember, we talked about this at the first of the year. When we add a value to the x inside the parentheses, I believe it shifts opposite of the sign. So this would be taking that sine curve and shifting it to the right, pi over 3 units. Okay? So it's going to start at pi over 3, and then it's going to start repeating itself on whatever the period is. So as we draw this graph, all right, I'm not starting at 0 this time, okay? I'm going to have to shift it over to pi over 3, which, well, let's just first. Here's how we find out where the start and the end are, okay? The left, or the start, we'll just call it the start. What you do is you take what's inside the parentheses and set it equal to 0, because normally that's what starts at 0. And then I solve it. I add pi over 3, and that tells me that it starts at pi over 3. All right. End. All right. Find out where it ends. I'm going to take, where does it, x minus pi over 3. And what value does the standard parent function of sine end at? It ends at 2 pi, right? It goes from 0 to 2 pi. So what I'm going to say is, what is it when I equal it to 2 pi? So once again, I solve for x by adding pi over 3 to both sides. And I get 2 pi plus pi over 3, which would be what? I'm going to have to find a common denominator of 3. So would everybody agree that 6 pi over 3, 6 pi over 3 is equivalent to 2 pi, right? Plus pi over 3. So this ends at 7 pi over 3. Now from there, I need to find the points in between those. Then I need to find the points that are in between that and that. And really, here's 1. Here's -1. I could actually draw the graph right now before I label the points, because the actual numbers of the points are inconsequential to me drawing the graph. All right, this is a sine curve. The sine starts in the middle. At the first tick point, it's going to top out. Now, this one has an amplitude of 1/2, so it's going to top out at -1/2 and 1/2. Here, the second one, it comes back through the middle. The third one, it bottoms up. The fourth one, it bottoms out, and the last one there. So I can actually draw my graph before I label the points, right? If I know where it starts, I know where it ends, then I know halfway in between it's crossing through, halfway is the top, halfway between the back two or is the bottom. Now, let's label these points. Remember how we do that? To find the center point, you average the first and the last. So pi over 3 plus 7 pi over 3 equals 8 pi over 3. And then we divide by 2 to find the average, or multiply by 1/2, which is 8 pi over 6, which is 4 pi over 3. So this is 4 pi over 3. What's this one? Well, what's pi over 3 plus 4 pi over 3? 1 plus 4 is 5, so this is 5 pi over 3 times 1/2. And I get 5 pi over 6. So this point is 5 pi over 6. And then these two, I add these two. What's 4 pi over 3 plus 7 pi? That's 11 pi over 3. To find the average, I divide by 2 or multiply by 1/2, and I get 11 pi over 6. And there we go. So this graph, if we looked at our standard sine curve, it would have been, if I didn't shift it, it would have started here, and it would have been something like this right here. Okay, it got shifted over by pi over 3, which was what, 30 degrees? It got shifted over 30 degrees. Okay? Any questions there? All right, so the horizontal translation comes whenever we add or subtract something to the x variable. All right, now let's look at one more translation, or one more, whoops, wrong thing. I need to insert a page. Now, vertical translation shifts up or down. So if we go back to our standard y equals d plus a, and let's just look at the sign. All right, so as we label that, the C right here is what moves it horizontally, right? The B affects the period. The A affects the amplitude. And then the D is what is a vertical shift. And whatever that number is, it just shifts it up or down. A positive shifts it up. A negative shifts it down. Okay? The amplitude stays the same, and we'll show you what you got to be careful with on that. So let's look at an example of this. Y equals 2 plus 3 cosine of 2x. All right. Now, notice there's nothing been added to the x. So I know this one is starting at 0. I'm going to use 0. Okay? Then I've got to find my period, half of that, then halfway in between those two. I also know my amplitude. My amplitude is 3. All right? Now, this right here tells me everything's going to shift up by a value of 2. So normally, if it's 3 cosine, it tops out at 3. But this one is going to top out at 5 because I've shifted it up 2. Does that make sense? Where's it going to bottom out at now? Normally it bottoms out at -3, but it's shifted up 2. So this one's going to bottom out at -1. Okay? So it's going to bottom out at -1. It's going to top out at 5. All right? What is normally our center? Our center is normally the x-axis. It's been shifted up 2, so this is actually going to be the center of our graph this time. Right? Now it all works the same. I've got to find, or really, I can draw the graph right now without knowing the endpoints, because we're going to go, I know my cosine starts at the top. It's going to start there. The next tick mark is when it crosses through center, which is right here. The next tick mark is where it bottoms out, which is right here. The next tick mark is when it passes back through the center. And the last tick mark is where it completes its cycle. So I know this is what it's going to look like. Now I just need to label my points. All right, what's the period? The period is 2 pi over b, which is this one right there, 2. The period is pi. So this is completing a cycle in pi. Halfway between that is pi over 2, right? Half of pi is pi over 2. Halfway between 0 and pi over 2. 0 plus pi over 2 is pi over 2. Divide that in half to find the average, or multiply by 1/2, and I get pi over 4. So this is pi over 4, right? Which is actually 45 degrees. This is 90 degrees. This is 180 degrees. And then pi over 2 plus pi, which would be 2 pi over 2 when I found the common, would be 3 pi over 2. Multiply by 1/2 to get the average. 3 pi over 4. which would be what, 90, 135 degrees if we were looking at degrees. But most everything on your assignment is done in radians. Okay. So what's our standard? Our standard cosine curve is right here. It starts at 1. It would actually go, it goes through, it's normally, pi is usually half of it. So it normally goes through here. It's going to bottom out here. So that's what our normal curve sort of looks like. It's been scrunched up because the period is shorter. It's been shifted up, and it's also got a bigger amplitude. Okay. So any questions? All right. So once again, let's look at this. The number directly in front of the sine or cosine is the amplitude. The number in front of the x, 2 pi over that number, tells us the period. How long does it take to go through one cycle? This tells us how that's shifted, left or right. If it's plus something, it's going to shift it back. Minus something is going to shift it forward because we set it equal to 0 and solve, right? We set it equal to 0 to find the starting point. We set it equal to 2 pi to find the ending point. And then this tells us how much is the center, or basically the x-axis. Where is it getting shifted for this? The center of this is getting shifted up or down. Okay? So that should get you through this assignment. I'm going to go ahead and assign it. And then obviously the rest of the time you can ask questions or whatever you need to help us get through it. We'll work on this today and Wednesday. Once again, if you have assignments you need to get made up or you want to redo or whatever, just ask for extensions. We can get those. Anything done? Most of you have at least have done most of the work. There's not a whole lot of people behind.